down on 3. No turnovers today.
That's our main goal. We just went out there today with thinking about the same things we always do, try not to turn the ball over. We feel like if we don't turn it over at all, we can't lose.
How'd you feel on the road down 17-14, Tommy?
Well, I think it was, we were kind of a little discouraged at the moment. You know, all these people that were there were making all this kind of noise, but we knew we could move the ball on offense, and that's all we need to do is have the ball a little bit more and get it down the line.
Is that your first touchdown?
Yes.
How'd it feel?
And feel great. I've been looking for that all year.
What did you think when they told you to go in the game?
Well, and I knew that I could run on it, but I didn't know how far that I could push it or, how fast that I could run. But everything turned out all right.
We think turning the ball over plays a big point in our offense. We think we don't turn the ball over, we got a possible chance of winning.
Did you feel any different when Jackson went in the game?
Well, he's always an uplift for us because, he's always capable of the big play. Whenever he touches the ball, he's capable of a big play. So, yeah, I guess it was.
That's what they heard us on was the big plays. They didn't really have no long drives on us, and we knew that. We knew that the only way that's going to really hurt us on was on the big ones.
We gave them those 2 big plays, and, that hurt us. But our offense showed class, and they stuck the ball in there.
On the 2 big fumble recoveries, you waited a long time for everybody to get off of you so you could get up with your ball, right?
Yes, sir.
This guy ran out of the pile and nobody knew he had the ball when he got on the sidelines. Did you know that?
Yes, sir. I saw the ball come from off another one of the players, and I jumped on and I knew I had it, so I got up. I was so excited. I just wanted my team to know we had it.
Did you know they were looking for it back there?
Yeah, they told me about that, but I didn't know it.
Oh, yeah, I like it.
All right.
The justices have 8 days before the November 2nd general election to decide if Mr. Hayden's name can remain on the ballot. Justice Adams and Justice Sam Beatty aren't ruling in the case since their seats, place number 3 and 2 respectively, are at the center of the dispute. When Mr. Hayden presented his case to the 6 justices, he showed them his check used to pay the qualifying fee.
This check, which cleared a bank in Birmingham, Alabama, by the Republican Party, the payee on it, now $1,200, represents the filing fee that I paid.
Mr. Hayden went on to explain the contact he made with party representatives to make sure he was following party procedure. Mr. Hayden told the High Court that he didn't find out he qualified for the wrong seat until after the July 9th deadline, and says he should be allowed to switch after the deadline. But attorneys challenging Hayden's nomination say he qualified for place number 2, then switched to place 3 to run against Justice Adams. Attorneys say there is no law permitting a political party to switch a candidate from one race to another. The court took the arguments under advisement and didn't immediately indicate when it'll reach a decision. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the State Supreme Court.
Corrections or modification had any validity.
Wallace campaign strategists say they're pleased with their efforts going into the last week of the campaign. They continue to insist they have polls showing them 10 to 15 percentage points ahead, but they say the name of their poll will remain a secret for the time being. One Wallace strategist says one of their polls even shows Republican Emery Farmer dropping slightly, something they attribute to what they call Mr. Farmer's negative campaign. Mr. Wallace's aides say they interpret the negative campaign by Mr. Farmer as a sign of desperation. Much of the campaigning during the past several weeks has been directed toward Jefferson County, a county Mr. Wallace has rarely won. But now Wallace campaigners say they are confident they've been able to swing much of that crucial Jefferson County support. As one Wallace aide put it, if we can carry Jefferson County, the fat lady can quit singing and we can all go home. Mr. Wallace begins his heaviest week of campaigning, which will see at least 14 campaign appearances in the next 6 days. An effort they say is to show Mr. Wallace's health is not an issue. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News with the Wallace campaign.
After meeting in executive session, the State Board of Funeral Services revoked the license of Welch Funeral Home and the embalming license of funeral director B.W. Fitz. Fitz is accused of burying a stillborn infant in the same casket as 78-year-old Willie Daniels. Fitz attorney Maury Smith says his client was denied due process because Fitz was not fully informed of the charges against him. Smith says he'll appeal the board's ruling to circuit court. The board turned down a motion by Smith to continue the hearing. Smith asked the board to delay the hearing until a $1 million-plus lawsuit filed by Daniels' widow could be heard in Montgomery Circuit Court. Fitz, who was charged with misrepresentation, fraud, and gross immorality, can reapply for a new license anytime. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
That is not well.
This study is the single most far-reaching effort ever undertaken in higher education. This council of 21 citizens from all over the state with varied backgrounds will try and determine the needs of the state for higher education in years to come.
Recommendations hopefully will come up in all of those areas, in the area of how we can best utilize our human resources, our natural resources, what we can do to enhance economic and business development in the state, and how we could improve public service through the medium of higher education.
The council will be looking at broad goals, leaving the specifics of curriculum and budgetary matters to the universities and the Commission on Higher Education. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Mr. Farmer's pollster Lance Terrence says yesterday's tracking results show Emory Farmer 8 or 9 points ahead of George Wallace. Mr. Farmer says the Wallace campaign is aware of the figures.
And if we predict that there will be now much thrashing around about the campaign, and if we will hear much talk about the rich Republicans, and if the Republicans are trying to buy this election, and I wanted to set the record straight at this moment. We have received $60,000 and only $60,000 from the Republican Governors Conference. We have not received any money from the Republican National Committee.
Mr. Farmer says his lead in the polls came about as a result of his pointing out Mr. Wallace's record in office.
The fact that the Building Commission Chairman, Hugh Adams, went to the penitentiary for perjury is a matter that people ought to understand, that the Finance Director under Wallace went to the penitentiary. These are things that I think everybody needs to have before them to make a judgment.
Though he had no proof, Mr. Farmer charged the National Democratic Committee is paying for Mr. Wallace's TV ads and telephone banks. Wallace campaign officials insist their candidate has the lead, as we learn in this report from Chris Grimshaw.
But insofar as hiring or purchasing or any expenditure of funds other than that and the normal salaries that we already have, we're really not spending anything.
You have any idea how long this situation will last?
No, not at this time. I don't have any idea at all.
What effect did the last couple of weeks have on the jury system and the court system in the state?
Well, statewide, I'm sure it had some effect. For us here in Montgomery County, we were fortunate enough to have some 90 people volunteer to serve as jurors, so the net effect for us was not significant at all.
Very minimal cost because we're already using existing services. And the only cost that we can project so far is about $125. Watauga Aging Program, and in Elmore County, it's a service which can be done at almost no cost, which will alert the proper authorities within the Postal Service, and they will alert us, and we will. We think this is program which will provide a very vital and needed service to elderly people and the handicapped in the community. It's a service which can be provided at a very minimal cost because we're already using existing services.
Of the Republican Party. Well, I want to ask you about that because it was not clear previous day. We take no position that the Secretary of State officially.
What do you want by way of relief should you prevail? You say that you asked for this to be treated as a class.
Clearer. You made mention initially about the rules of the Republican Party.
Photostat of this check, which cleared a bank in Birmingham, Alabama, by the Republican Party. The payee on it, now $1,200. Represents the filing fee that I paid. My Exhibit D is material which is furnished to political candidates by the Republican Party of Alabama. Significant. It would be appropriate to me to bring the appellee to say that the judgment of the lower court was correct. But there's some house.
That was a refutation, if you will, maybe not an official one, but a refutation of the certificate made by the Secretary of State to the probate judges, which was made conditional upon a void certification of the Republican Party. Well, I want to ask you about this. From looking at the record preliminarily, it would appear that if the October 5 corrections or modification had any validity from the Secretary.
There were 1,000 people there, so consequently we printed 1,000 tickets. And whether we can really get that many chairs and tables in there, we don't know. But that's okay. I just thought I was hearing things. You worked all weekend, didn't you? Because I watched it. So we're going to end up getting at Constitution Hall. We have 20 different county committees that will be coming into Montgomery as far away from Lee County to Perry County and all between, moving into Montgomery on Saturday night. And they are coming here and they want to make a good show, and probably to a large extent because it's the back door, the front door of Emory Farmer's campaign. So it's a matter of Montgomeryans and our neighbors.
The main issue in this lawsuit is whether or not the state of Alabama was negligent by releasing David Candidate, and did Felix Richardson meet his death because the state was negligent by letting David Candidate go. In his opening statement to the jury today, Neil Pope, the attorney for the Richardson family, told the jury today, evidence will show that state mental health officials released Candidate when they should have known he was dangerous and would possibly hurt or kill somebody again. Attorneys for the defense in their opening statement to the jury panel told the jury that Candidate was treated and had shown improvement before being released, and they would show they acted from what they saw as reasonable evidence that Candidate would return to society and be treated at an outpatient facility. They deny any negligence. Judge Sam Taylor told the jury today he had no idea how long it would take to resolve this case, but I've been told by some of the people involved in the litigation that it could take as long as 3 weeks. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery County Courthouse.
Before we went riding, where were you? Yeah, well, we went downtown this afternoon. I was with you. I was driving the car. You make a pretty...
But the question may not be answered easily. There are many areas that higher education can play a part in, such as natural resources, human needs, employment services, and public service. This council appointed by the Commission on Higher Education will try and determine what path universities and colleges in the state should take.
We would want to look at the direction the state of Alabama should go over the next decade or perhaps even longer, the input and impact that higher education can have, the way that higher education could structure itself so that it could help the state meet not only challenges that they're certain to have in the next decade, but take advantage of some of the opportunities that will present themselves. We want to establish, if we can, a role whereby higher education can be helpful to the state of Alabama in its progress over the next 10 to 15 years.
Once the priorities are established, the colleges and universities can determine what they, as individual institutions, can best contribute to the statewide goals. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
To prove he's ahead, Mr. Farmer produced a memo from his pollster Lance Terrence that said the results of Sunday's tracking shows Mr. Farmer beating Mr. Wallace on Election Day by 8 or 9 points. Mr. Farmer predicts now that he's ahead, the Wallace campaign will try and accuse the National Republican Party of pumping money into his campaign in an effort to buy the election. Mr. Farmer says he's received $60,000 from the Republican Governors Conference and none from the Republican National Committee. Mr. Farmer says one of the reasons he's now ahead is because his opponent won't debate.
Mr. Wallace's refusal to debate, after I had immediately accepted, points out the fact that he either has something to hide or something he does not wish the people of the state of Alabama to see. Therefore, I think it is reacting negatively towards him and a positive towards me.
The campaign travels to Birmingham tomorrow, where Mr. Farmer is to speak to the Vulcan Kiwanis Club. Then he'll return to Montgomery to answer questions from a panel of journalists in the House chamber at the state capitol. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News with the Farmer campaign in Montgomery.
As the instrumentality of the authority, that provides that the authority is of Alabama. Whereas the corporation proportion and the First National Bank of Birmingham.
Postmen have been looking out for people along their routes informally for years, but now they'll be looking specifically for accumulations of mail in the mailboxes of elderly or handicapped people, accumulations that might signal illness or injury. Organizers believe as many as 5,000 people over the age of 60 may live alone in Montgomery, Prattville, and Wetumpka.
We think this is a program which will provide a very vital and needed service to elderly people and handicapped in the community. It's a service which can be provided at a very minimal cost because we're already using existing services.
The program is based on similar programs in other cities, and it's expected to be effective. So when postmen see mail backing up at the homes of people over 60 or people who are handicapped, they'll contact the proper authorities to let them know help may be needed. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Mr. Wallace's campaign speech is little changed, primarily based on his experience and accomplishments while in office. Mr. Wallace is not engaged in much personal bantering with his Republican opposition. The only jab Mr. Wallace takes at Mr. Farmer is on the Republicans' crime position.
We hear people today running for governor that are talking about how strong they are for law and order. We needed them 10 years ago to be speaking with me and others to stop what became the breakdown of law and order. But no, they were not doing that. What were they doing 10 years ago? They were building houses under a subsidized federal housing program, getting to be a multi-millionaire like most all Republicans are in Alabama.
Mr. Wallace's strategists say they are running a positive campaign aimed at allowing Mr. Farmer to perhaps injure himself with a negative campaign. Wallace campaigner says this has increased Mr. Wallace's positions in the polls. But meanwhile, Mr. Farmer contends his campaign strategy is helping him. Dennis Latham has more on that. Former Governor George Wallace is continuing his traditional form of campaigning, which primarily consists of large evening rallies, free food, entertainment by country music artists, and a campaign speech by the three-time governor. Mr. Wallace continues to tease the poll issue, only saying he has polls showing him in the lead. And Mr. Wallace says he doesn't want any specifics of poll results to create any overconfidence in a race where Mr. Wallace says Republicans are putting up their strongest effort in more than 16 years. Mr. Wallace is taking a few political jabs at the Republican nominee, Emory Farmer, saying the Republicans' stand on crime is only an echo of his stand of 10 years ago.
What were they doing 10 years ago? They were building houses under a subsidized federal housing program, getting to be a multimillionaire like most all Republicans are in Alabama.
And Mr. Wallace continues to poke at Montgomery businessman Winton Blunt.
Mr. Blunt did, who signed up to vote in the Democratic primary, and when you sign up to vote, you sign to vote for the nominees of the party. Well, he's writing a letter now for my opposition, wanting 1,000, 3,000, 5,000.
And Mr. Wallace is also taking aim on the national Republican economic policies, blaming it for the current economic conditions. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News with the Wallace campaign in Ozark.
Lately, along with the West European papers.
We should be giving the fat, not the lean, the walking papers. And in an administration of mine, that's where the axe would grind. It would be we'd be cutting out fat instead of lean.
I'm with Henry on that note. I would not support any new taxes. In fact, I'm talking about tax reductions. Now, I'm pleased to see that the proration this year went across the board. Previously, it has been directed at the schools. And I could see no point in the past few years of the schools being prorated and other departments being left alone.
Results of a Birmingham Post-Herald poll published this morning show former Governor George Wallace winning the general election.
I think polls are like opinions. I think everybody's got one. I just released one yesterday from a very respected pollster that showed pretty much the opposite of that. Lance Terrence from Houston, Texas, who done polling all over the Southeast and usually more accurate than anybody else, says the race is dead even. That's what I think.
Mr. Farmer told members of the Vulcan Kiwanis Club in Birmingham that the real poll is the one he takes every time he visits across the state with the voters. He says next week the people of Alabama have a choice between him or what he called the negative politics of George Wallace. Mr. Farmer accused George Wallace of piling up mountains of debt on the people. He says while Mr. Wallace was governor, over $700 million in bond issues were authorized with no new revenue sources tapped to pay for the debt service. Mr. Wallace is also talking about polls. He appears to believe the Post-Herald poll more than his opponent does, as we learn in this report from Chris Grimshaw.
For the fifth straight month, a sample market basket of groceries cost in the $28 range, according to the Farm Bureau's monthly food survey. This month, shoppers statewide paid about $28.02 for groceries. The survey shows dairy and produce prices rose slightly, but that's expected for this time of year, according to officials, who also say decreases in beef, pork, and poultry offset that slight increase in the dairy and produce prices. The survey shows shoppers in Northeast Alabama paid the least amount for goods. Shoppers in South Alabama paid the most. Consumers in Central Alabama spent just under $28 for a basket of groceries, and Northwest Alabama shoppers paid just over $28 for food. Farm Bureau officials say prices are usually cheaper in the northeastern section of the state and are the most expensive in South Alabama. And officials say they expect the stabilizing prices or slow rising prices to continue for months to come. That's good news for consumers, but officials say that's bad news for farmers who are still receiving low prices for their goods. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Maintaining national security is the first essential to maintaining the economic health of your society.
Senator Towers, head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, came to praise Congressman Dickinson's work as ranking member on the House side of the same committee. But the subject of the news conference rapidly shifted from defense to the economy.
Actually, the marketplace is working, because if you consider that when Ronald Reagan came to office in January of last year, interest rates were around 21%. Now the prime's down to about 11.5%.
As for unemployment,
You can't hang that around the president's neck. An economy does not turn around overnight.
but the congressmen differ on how big a role all that will play in next week's elections.
I think we're going to do very well.
The margin between of undecided votes across the country is so thin now that anything volatile could throw it one way or another.
Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Dr. Menninger told the court David Candidate should not have been released because of his history of failing to take his medication unless closely supervised at Bryce. Menninger added during 2 hours on the stand for the plaintiffs that state mental health authorities should have noticed that Candidate became violent when he was off of his medication. The psychiatrist also said the doctors failed to notice this pattern. The defendant's attorneys contend the state did everything it could to help David Candidate and that he was released in light of federal court orders which enjoin the state from acting in conflict of federal guidelines. The defense is expected to strongly contend that negligence charges are not true because David Candidate received reasonable care while at Bryce Hospital and that the 6 state officials charged in the suit are not guilty of negligence. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery County Courthouse.
State Finance Director Joe Broadwater called the meeting for 2 reasons this afternoon. First, to dispel myths about proration of the state's general fund. Broadwater says proration is a very real matter, and by his projections, the state will stay in proration for the entire 1982-83 fiscal year. Then the State Finance Director outlined the latest crisis facing the general fund, a cash flow problem. Broadwater says even with the 15% proration, there won't be enough money coming into the general fund to meet its expenditures from November of this year until February of next year. It won't be until March of '83 that the general fund will show a surplus. Department heads who are already biting the bullet of proration are now being asked to bite down harder. Broadwater has asked all non-essential items be deleted and for state departments to live as much as they can from their earmarked and trust funds. Broadwater says the only way the state can make it through its financial problems the next 4 months is through sound management by department heads. The finance director says the cash flow problem is a very serious situation.
It's just like having a disease like being a diabetic. You know, if you will manage it properly, it doesn't cause you that much of a problem. But now it could kill you if you don't exercise the right management. The same thing is true with our shortfall or the cash flow problem right now. If we don't apply good management techniques right now to all of our departments, and as far as handling our money is concerned, we can create a severe problem for ourselves or for our departments on down the road. And this is
Broadwater says he's confident with teamwork the state can make it through the next 4 months. But if expenditures get out of hand, it could mean cutbacks in state services and perhaps even layoffs of state employees. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The report was spurred first by a critical faculty evaluation of Dr. Funderburk last February. At that time, a confidence vote for the president failed by a slim margin. Second, 2 top administrators have resigned. Dr. Grady Cox, Executive Vice President, and Dr. Taylor Littleton, Vice President for Academic Affairs. The subcommittee, in its report, puts full responsibility for these resignations on Dr. Funderburk. Committee members studied Dr. Funderburk's tenure at Auburn, his relationship with the faculty, and in particular, his relationship with Drs. Cox and Littleton. The committee claims that Dr. Funderburk consistently took away administrative duties and downgraded the positions of each vice president. And the report says that Dr. Funderburk, in effect, forced the resignations of both men.
Line by line.
The report goes on to say that there's a breakdown of communication and trust, illustrated by the alienation of Drs. Cox and Littleton from Dr. Funderburk. And it says that mirrors a similar separation between the president and the university faculty as a whole. The report says part of Dr. Funderburk's failure of confidence is that he confines most of his direct contacts to a close circle of advisors he brought with him from AUM, cutting him off from the rest of the university. A last illustration of what the report calls the president's behavior on matters of principle concerns his refusal to share documentation with the committee of his allegations of disloyalty on the part of the resigning vice president.
The section in the report.
If the full faculty accepts this report and a confidence vote fails, the committee wants Dr. Funderburk to offer his resignation. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News in Auburn.
The former governor spoke to the news reporters for a couple of minutes. His only indication of anything further was to say a couple of pollsters might have something interesting to say. With that, Mr. Wallace left his headquarters. Next came the two former Evans employees, Gil Red and Scarlett Red.
That the Ray Evans poll, on the times that he does even run a poll, is strictly influenced by money. Most all the people since I've been with him in a year and a half that he has predicted to win, we intend to show that these are the people that have been paying him money.
An accusation Mr. Evans flatly denies.
Sonny Callahan was paying between $3,000 and $4,000 a month.
Mr. Evans says many candidates who contracted his services pay him in monthly installments.
Ray Evans made the statement to both of us several times, because he liked to boast about it, that Emory Former was paying him $80,000 to handle his campaign.
Mr. Evans says depending on how complex candidates want their poll results, his fees range as high as $120,000. Mr. Evans didn't confirm that the Republican gubernatorial nominee, Emory Farmer, contracts his services, saying he doesn't release the names of his clients until after the election. The Reds also say they've seen actual poll results on Mr. Evans' desk.
I believe October the 12th on one showed Governor Wallace with 65% of the vote, and he came out the next day with a newsletter saying that Emory Former was in the lead. And the most recent one that I saw showed Governor Wallace with 60% of the vote, and he still says that Emory Former is in the lead.
Mr. Evans says no one, not even his employees, see anything but the published results. Mr. Evans claims Gil Red, a salesman for Evans, is not doing well on his commission salary and has apparently found a way to help Mr. Wallace and make some money. Meanwhile, the Farmer campaign is talking about other polls. Dennis Latham reports.
R-E-D-D. This is my niece, Scarlett Red. Well, I was until about 30 minutes ago. Ma'am?
All the polling data from this last campaign, as I
That the Ray Evans poll, on the times that he does even...
been accurate since 1970, consistently, and...
Sir, it's no secret. I came to Montgomery in November of '69. I was in a singing group at one time and went back with them called the Rain. Some of these people certainly knew what they were doing when they paid out the money. Some didn't. We're only here to show what the Ray Evans poll really is. Thank you very much.
Elections, I will accurately predict the outcome of that election, and again, whether it's used in the press.
Main problems has been upon legislative action. And, of course, the thing I would do as governor would speak out on matters that affect Alabama.
Mr. Farmer told the Vulcan Kiwanis Club in Birmingham that he believes his own polls, and they show the governor's race dead even right now, with him winning by 8 or 9 percentage points next Tuesday. He says the Birmingham Post-Herald poll showing Wallace ahead is academic. Mr. Farmer didn't let up on his opponent, saying when George Wallace was governor, he spent money like it was going out of style. He accused Mr. Wallace of burdening the people of Alabama with debt in the form of bond issues. Mr. Farmer says during Mr. Wallace's administration, more than $700 million in bonds were authorized.
$40 million off the top goes for paying the debt service in the highway department. $40 million right off the top that we could be using to fix bridges or build the interstate out here that was promised to you by my opponent for I don't know how many times, however many times he ran, that's however many times he promised it, I guess. But it still isn't finished to this day. And that's one of the things that should have been done and will be done immediately.
Mr. Farmer also promised to improve the job outlook for Alabamians by working on the state's economy. He says to have jobs, we must have business, and business will only go where it's appreciated. Mr. Farmer's next stop is the state capitol in Montgomery, where he'll answer questions at the League of Women Voters Forum. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News with the Farmer campaign in Birmingham.
For 10, yes, and not for 6.
Well, I don't know who said that, but whoever said that's playing loose with the truth. I have used Mr. Ray Evans' polling service. I've got canceled checks of what we've spent there. It was in no way to influence his vote because of whatever he said, because I'm interested in the truth. I'm interested in truth in any poll that I look at. But about the only poll I put confidence in now is a fence poll.
Are the players disappointed about no TV?
You know, I think our players are so concerned with winning, they haven't mentioned TV.
Are you disappointed about TV?
Well, naturally, I'm disappointed about it, but, you know, I think if we dwell on those kind of things, it takes our minds off of something we can do something about, and that's trying to get ready to play Florida.
In a sense, it's a money thing, though, isn't it? You
Well,
miss some revenue by not being on.
We miss some revenue by not being on television, sure. But you know, it's also the money thing with the network stations, CBS and ABC. They want Florida, Georgia. They want, all of them want Georgia because of Herschel Walker, and you know, I can understand that. We've had some situations this year. If it had turned out a little different, then we'd have been on television. You know, we were playing Tennessee after a loss or 2 losses or whatever. Southern Mississippi got beat the week before we played them, and they were considering putting that one on.
Been considered a lot, just haven't been on.
Well, that's right. But I think, you know, that's where our program is right now. You know, we've got to grow through those stages. We got to grow to the point to where, you know, we are the #1 attraction.
The call for a council inquiry into the death of Frank Pinkston came from District 4 Councilman Mark Gilmore. He wanted the inquiry to reconcile 2 separate and conflicting reports of the incident, one from the Montgomery Police Department and another from Councilman Donald Watkins.
After going through this council, questions being asked, nobody yet has said that Mr. Watkins' report was wrong.
Although Mr. Gilmore's motion was supported by some councilmen, it was sharply opposed by Mayor Emery Fulmer, who sent a letter and a tape-recorded message saying a council inquiry could be devastating to police morale, and he accused Mr. Watkins and Mr. Gilmore of playing politics. Mayor Fulmer's sentiments were echoed by other council members. The mayor ended his letter by saying the people of Montgomery will, quote, never forgive anyone who votes to destroy the effectiveness of the Montgomery Police Department. Councilman Willie Peake called that a threat to the council. And even though he did not support the inquiry, he did back up some of Mr. Watkins' findings about the shooting and said there may have been some problems in the police report of the incident. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Some 2,000 people enjoyed an old-fashioned political rally in Montgomery's Garrett Coliseum tonight. There was music, barbecue, camp stew, and of course, politics. Dickinson says the Ode to Billy Joe, referring to his Democratic opponent, Billy Joe Kemp, is a song of broken promises. Dickinson told the group nobody knows where his opponent stands on the issues, but he has a good idea where Kemp stands on the right-to-work law.
I don't believe that organized labor would have contributed over half of his campaign if he hadn't agreed to support the repeal of right to work.
The featured speaker at tonight's rally was Texas Senator John Tower, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who had a song himself. He sang the praises of his congressional counterpart.
And I feel confident that our country is safer because he's there, because he's listened to, and he's got clout. When he speaks with authority. He does his homework. And no junior congressman, I don't care what party he belongs to, is going to have the clout that Bill Dickinson has in the Congress today.
Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
We work so hard in practice on not turning the ball over, not throwing interceptions, and not fumbling the football. And when we put it on the ground in practice, you always see 11 guys giving their all to get to it and get the ball back. So I don't really think so. I hope that we keep playing like we are as far as effortless football, and we're going to work real hard to try to do that.
Mr. Fulmer assured the League of Women Voters that 4 years from now, if he's the incumbent governor, he'll accept an invitation to debate. He called Mr. Wallace's refusal to participate in tonight's debate an insult.
So obviously he must have something he does not want the people of Alabama to see. He must have something that he wishes to hide. He must be concerned that either physically or mentally he could not have stood the strain of this questioning. And I think the people of the state of Alabama have a right to know that. I think the people of the state of Alabama have a right to know that he would not come and face a public forum of the media, of the people, and under unrehearsed questions.
The first question from the panel of journalists dealt with education.
First of all, I came out first, early and often, for fully funded kindergarten programs, and I think that they should be funded from the first proceeds that we get from the royalties and severance taxes of the gas wells that have been hit in Mobile Bay. Education in itself is the foundation block, in my opinion, of our society, and K through 12 must be that main foundation block.
Mr. Fulmer was also asked about prayer in public schools.
Mr. Ross, you have the second question.
Mayor Farmer, do you favor organized prayer in public schools? And if elected, would you continue to spend state money to defend Governor Bob James' school prayer bill?
I think prayer is appropriate in this House, where it is always, a prayer is always offered. I think prayer is appropriate in our homes. It's appropriate in our businesses. I think it's appropriate in schools. I cannot believe that a nation that has as its motto, "In God We Trust," can find something wrong with the idea of communicating with the God we say we trust. I personally prefer a private prayer, but I would prefer a prayer of any sorts as opposed to no prayer. As far as the defending Governor James, he is quite capable of defending himself, needs no defense from me. I think that that it is a matter that should be adjudicated in the courts, and whatever the court says in the final analysis, I'm quite willing to abide by it.
Mr. Fulmer said emphatically that the state doesn't need any more taxes. He did say the state needs to change the retirement system for teachers and state employees.
It should be changed for future employees because of the information I have that we had a system that cost the taxpayers in 1950 some $4 million and has accelerated at a geometric progression to now some $255 million.
The candidate told the panel that the way to maintain Medicaid services in light of increased costs is to find a more efficient way of providing those services.
And I'm glad you mentioned Medicaid because my opponent, who's not here tonight, left the state with a bill of $43 million when he went out of office. We've been trying to recover from that for a long period of time.
Mr. Fulmer renewed his law and order position, saying he wants criminals to know they'll be caught, prosecuted, sentenced, and sent to prison until they can learn some matters. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Well, now, more specifically.
Deputy Sheriff Robert Stone told the court he was in this bank when he looked across the street and saw David Candidate stabbing Felix Richardson. Stone said he drew his weapon, ran out the bank, and caught Candidate, who ran across the street into this parking lot. Stone said Richardson was lying on the ground, candidate's knife lying beside his body. He said candidate was wild-eyed and sweating profusely. The defense has attempted to show that Felix Richardson, shown in this 1956 school photo, may have provoked candidate. But the plaintiffs say Richardson was retarded and weighed 100 pounds and never bothered anyone. During today's court hearing, the knife candidate used to stab Felix Richardson was introduced by the plaintiffs, and Richardson's sister became hysterical, causing a short delay in the proceedings, which are expected to continue tomorrow morning before Circuit Judge Sam Taylor. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery County Courthouse.
Republican Emery Farmer was met at the airport in Bay Minette by a group of supporters. Representatives of the local news media were also there to ask questions about issues in the governor's race. Mr. Farmer again criticized his opponent George Wallace for not participating in the League of Women Voters debate. The candidate then visited a Bay Minette aluminum casting plant to ask workers there to vote for him. Mr. Farmer told employees at the county courthouse that technical schools are the backbone of Alabama's technological advances in the future. He said junior colleges are the best idea the state's ever had, but they've become too politically involved. Mr. Farmer told a local bank employee the reason the highway department's on short rations is because George Wallace's past administrations passed large bond issues without the means to pay the debt service. Political polls have been the subject of great interest recently, and today Mr. Farmer's pollster Lance Terrence discussed their poll with reporters in Birmingham.
I feel like we have a little bit of deja vu here because in the state of Alabama, it's our professional opinion based upon a lot of research. We've done over 4,000 interviews going back to January in this state. So this is not exactly an underpowered research program we've got for Emery Farmer.
Mr. Farmer ended his visit to Bay Minette with a stop by his campaign headquarters. He'll go to Foley, Fairhope, and Mobile next. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News with the Farmer campaign in Bay Minette.
Former Governor Wallace said he didn't watch any media coverage of last night's League of Women Voters debate. When asked about his reaction to the Republicans' charge that he was afraid to debate, Mr. Wallace only said he didn't want to draw a crowd for Mr. Farmer's benefit. Mr. Wallace also had little to say about the allegations made by two former Evans poll employees charging Evans with fraud during a news conference at the Wallace headquarters.
Oh, well, that's academic. Everybody knows that. I mean, you know that yourself, don't you? Yes, you do. You know that. You know darn well it is not a scientific poll. It is a poll for those who subscribe and give him money. And that's a fact, and you all know it. And why a reputable television station would even mention a false poll, which is not scientific, is something I don't understand.
Mr. Wallace is campaigning in North Alabama with 6 stops planned. Mr. Wallace says he carried this area strongly during the Democratic primaries and decided to visit now to show his appreciation for their support. While Mr. Wallace is campaigning in North Alabama, his Republican opponent is campaigning in the far southern corner of the state. Dennis Latham has more.
Ready. There we go.
40 years ago, some Prattville residents planted a grove of bamboo brought from China, and for years after that, the bamboo grew unattended and virtually forgotten in a wooded area on Prattville's northern edge. But now the bamboo has been rediscovered by area residents, and it's the centerpiece of Wilderness Park.
We're about a third of the way through. Now, this is just the first phase, and we're looking forward to completing the second and third phase within a couple of years.
The park is really just a trail through the woods, designed to avoid altering the natural landscape and vegetation. It features many different kinds of plants, including the second largest beech tree in the state.
But this is 26 acres of just pure natural wilderness, and this is the way it was when it was found. From what I've talked to people, there's not another wilderness park within the city limits of any town in the United States.
So far, the park has cost $52,000. Much of the money came from the federal government, while some local support came from the Prattville Spinners Club. Within the next 2 years, city officials hope to expand the park with even more trails leading to a hardwood forest behind the bamboo. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News, reporting from Wilderness Park in Prattville.
Well, we're going to do about a couple more miles of just dirt trails, walking trails up through the hardwood forest part of the park, and then we're going to have the swinging bridges over through the bamboo. We're about a third of the way through. Now, this is just the first phase, and we're looking forward to completing the second and third phase within a couple of years.
Reservations about what they did have to say?
No, I don't know what they said.
Okay, they had some comments to make about Mr. Evans' poll being somewhat fraudulent.
Oh, well, that's academic. Everybody knows that. I mean, you know that yourself, don't you? Yes, you do. You know that. You know darn well it is not a scientific poll. It is a poll for those who subscribe and give him money. And that's a fact, and you all know it. And why a reputable television station would even mention a false poll, which is not scientific, is something I don't understand.
Before this season began, there were those that thought the Alabama-Mississippi State game might go a long way in determining the Southeastern Conference champion. Although Alabama's still in the thick of the race, Mississippi State has fallen by the wayside, the result of 5 straight losses, 3 of those in the SEC. Coach Bear Bryant says that's surprising to him.
Yes, it did surprise me, but I think most any year your good teams, your schedule luck and injury luck has a lot to do with it, and they had bad luck injury-wise and schedule-wise also.
Preparing for Mississippi State is no easy chore. Despite being 3-5, the Bulldogs have proven they can be explosive.
What's the most impressive thing about State?
Well, the offense, the speed, really is the most impressive thing. John Bond, who is an excellent quarterback, he just makes the big plays. Unbelievable, really. 5 or 6 on that offensive team played 4 years regular, so they're a real explosive team too.
The record doesn't show quite how talented they really are. They've got a lot of people coming back that beat us 2 years ago, and you know, we feel like that when we go to Jackson that they're going to think a lot about that, and they're going to have their hopes up, and they're going to play a good football game.
Their offensive line is the same offensive line that we played 2 years ago, that the Mississippi State team that beat us, and with Bond back and Haddocks and Al Ricky Edwards, they're explosive. We know by going against our offense every day over here, the wishbone, the wing bone, it can put points on the board and it's capable of moving the ball.
Yes, it is a must-win for us, you know, and we can't take nothing away from Mississippi State. You know, they're capable of beating us. They got a pretty good ball club, even though their record don't show it. You know, 3-5. You know, but this is a must-win for us.
State and Bama tee it up 1:30 Saturday afternoon in Jackson. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Richard Mayor John Smith greeted Mr. Fulmer as he arrived at the Roger Williams Housing Project in North Mobile for a hot dog, barbecue, and Emory Fulmer rally. Mayor Smith endorsed Mr. Fulmer for governor about a month ago.
He understands the dynamic problems that the black community is faced today. He knows what leadership is. He knows how to appeal to all segments of the community. He understands the economic situation that is being expressed by the federal government, and he excites us.
Mr. Fulmer says Mayor Smith and others will help in his administration with some new and innovative ideas. In a speech, he told the crowd that Alabama must solve its problems.
Let me say this to you. George Wallace can't solve the problems of the state of Alabama.
Amen.
He's been the problem of the state of Alabama.
One man in the crowd was concerned about public housing.
There's a public bill before Congress now, and if it's passed, these people won't have nowhere to stay.
You want to know how he stands?
That's what I want to know.
Well, you don't have to give him cost.
But he won't answer. He walked off. John moved him. I don't know what I don't support either one.
That's your right. That's your right.
But at least these people ought to know.
Later, Mr. Fulmer told reporters that he's not opposed to public housing. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News with the Fulmer campaign in Mobile.
Personally, to support me, and that's why I'm here.
These Chilton County farmers come to Montgomery every week to sell their homegrown goods. Fresh greens, fresh eggs, canned fruits and vegetables. But these small farmers say business for them isn't good this year, and neither are prices for their crops.
We've had better years than we've had for the last 3 or 4 years. It's just rough.
But they still come to the Montgomery Curb Market to cater to shoppers looking for fresh fruits and vegetables and bargains. But these farmers say bargain days for them are over.
The cost squeeze has got us both. In other words, we're paying twice the price of stuff that we have to use than what we're getting out of our stuff that we have to sell. Our stuff, what we're selling, is staying on the same price it's been for years, and we're paying 3 and 4 times the price for the stuff that we have to produce the stuff with.
The farmers didn't appear to be angry, but rather concerned about what's in store for them in the future. Some of the farmers aren't optimistic, but say they do hope and pray for better days ahead. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. Shoppers usually go to the curb market to buy freshly grown fruits and vegetables. Some farmers' wives bring a variety of their canned goods to sell. This is the off-season for these Chilton County farmers who come every week to the Montgomery Curb Market to sell their homegrown goods to shoppers looking for a bargain. While the busy housewives shop for the best buys, the farmers say bargain days for them are long gone.
Never has really been good, but we've had better years than we've had for the last 3 or 4 years. It's just rough.
These small farmers have to pay higher prices for feed, fertilizer, and equipment, just like the big farmers. They say business for both isn't good.
The little farmer is hurting, and also the big farmer's hurt. The big farmer thought he'd squeeze out the little man, but the consequence is he's having to go before the little man's gone. But the little man's hurting too.
Now, as prices at the grocery stores have stabilized for the time being, that's good news for shoppers. But Farm Bureau officials say the bad news for farmers is that they're still getting low prices for their crops. And these small farmers aren't optimistic about the future.
There's one thing for sure, jobs may go, but we've still got to eat.
Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Ready. There we go.
Former Governor George Wallace has 2 primary forms of campaigning. One form puts him in front of a large crowd gathered not only to hear Mr. Wallace, but to enjoy his rally-type atmosphere, which usually includes entertainment and food. But today, Mr. Wallace executed his second form of campaigning. He headed toward North Alabama for a day of shotgun speeches in 6 cities and 6 counties. This quick stop-and-speak format isn't used as much as the rally form, but Mr. Wallace says he likes it because he says it shows he cares enough about a particular area to visit. Aides say today's itinerary through Pickens, Fayette, Lamar, Marion, Winston, and Franklin counties was chosen by Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace says he wanted to make these stops to show his appreciation for the Wallace victories during the primaries in these counties. Mr. Wallace says although he didn't carry Pickens County in the primary runoff, today's stops don't represent trouble spots, but in the campaign, he says instead they represent courtesy calls. Mr. Wallace says his paralyzation doesn't stop him from using this style of campaigning. He says the only thing he's lost to his paralyzation is the ability to move through the crowd, but he says that's compensated by allowing the crowd to move by him. The former governor traveled more than 170 miles, 6 20-minute speeches in just more than 7 hours, a schedule that moved him into his last stop in Russellville after dark. This is the last stop-and-speak campaign day on the former governor's itinerary. The remaining campaign stops will be in the evening rally format. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News, traveling with the Wallace campaign.
I said back in